The rain began before dusk and deepened into a relentless storm by nightfall, turning the windows of Ashford Manor into trembling sheets of silver. Beyond the glass, lightning split the sky above the ancient oaks, while inside the great house every corridor glowed with candlelight. To the outside world, Duke Adrian Ashford and his wife, Lady Vivienne Ashford, were the image of aristocratic perfection. Their wedding had filled newspapers, their portraits adorned drawing rooms, and their appearances at society functions inspired admiration wherever they went. Yet beneath the elegance of titles and ceremony, a quiet fracture had been widening for years. Vivienne had entered the marriage with a hopeful heart and an unwavering belief in devotion. She loved Adrian with the steady certainty of someone who chose loyalty every day. She learned his habits, memorized his moods, and filled the manor with warmth whenever his silences grew long. But there remained a door inside him that never fully opened. Before meeting Vivienne, Adrian had been engaged to Lady Isabella Hawthorne, whose sudden death had shattered his future. Time had softened the sharpest edges of grief, yet her memory lingered in corners he never allowed anyone to touch. He cared for Vivienne deeply, but part of him still lived among ghosts. That distance hurt more because neither of them spoke of it. She offered patience when she longed for affection and understanding when she desired honesty. Adrian noticed every sacrifice, yet gratitude could not become the love she deserved. Watching all of this with hidden satisfaction was Adrian's cousin, Lord Malcolm Ashford. Charming in public and calculating in private, Malcolm carried a quiet resentment toward the family he believed had stolen the future that should have been his. As long as Adrian remained happily married, the Ashford line seemed secure. Malcolm needed that certainty destroyed. Over months, he constructed a deception with meticulous care, gathering forged letters, fabricated witnesses, and planted rumors. Every piece pointed toward a single lie, that Vivienne was secretly meeting another gentleman. The trap closed on a night when thunder rattled the library windows. Adrian had spent the evening reviewing estate matters when Malcolm entered carrying a bundle of correspondence. One by one, the letters were placed before the Duke. They appeared intimate. They implied affection. They described meetings that had never occurred. Adrian read them once, then again. With every line, disbelief gave way to anger. By the time the final page rested on the desk, jealousy had ignited into something far more dangerous. Vivienne was summoned immediately. She entered the library wearing a pale evening gown, her face illuminated by firelight. Adrian stood rigid beside the desk. Malcolm remained near the doorway. "What is this?" Adrian demanded, throwing the letters across the polished wood. Confusion crossed her features as she bent to read them. Then came shock. Then disbelief. She looked up, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "Adrian, these are not. Do not lie to me." The interruption struck harder than a slap. Vivienne stared at him. She had imagined arguments before. Every marriage suffered them. But never this. Never the cold fury in his voice. Never the certainty that she had already been judged. She tried again. "You must listen. Someone has done this deliberately." Malcolm lowered his gaze, performing the role of reluctant witness. Adrian saw only betrayal. The old wound left by Isabella's death suddenly reopened, mixing grief with humiliation. The thought that he might once again lose someone he loved overwhelmed reason. Instead of hearing Vivienne's explanation, he heard only his own fear. Servants gathered outside the partially open doors, drawn by raised voices and thunder. Vivienne noticed them. So did Adrian. The realization that others might know of the scandal deepened his anger. "You have embarrassed this family," he said. "I have done nothing wrong." The words emerged softly, yet they carried the weight of truth. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across Adrian's face. Then lightning flashed beyond the windows. A deafening crack of thunder followed. At that same instant, the large wedding portrait hanging above the fireplace tore loose from its hook and crashed to the floor. Glass shattered across the carpet. The painted image of bride and groom splintered beneath broken reflections. The room fell silent. Even the servants seemed afraid to breathe. Vivienne looked at the ruined portrait. Adrian looked at the letters. Malcolm watched both of them. The next words changed everything. "Never speak to me again." The sentence echoed through the library long after it was spoken. Adrian expected outrage. He expected tears, denials, demands, anything that might challenge his judgment. Instead, Vivienne became very still. The hurt in her eyes was so profound that it seemed to extinguish the last light in the room. Slowly, she straightened her shoulders. She looked at him one final time, not with anger but with heartbreak. Then she bowed her head and walked away without another word. She kept that promise. Days passed. then weeks. At breakfast, she remained silent. During evening gatherings, she spoke to servants through written notes. When Adrian entered a room, she acknowledged him only with a polite nod. The manor grew unbearably quiet. Each silence felt heavier than the last. Yet pride prevented him from taking back what he had said. One night, months later, Vivienne sat alone in her chamber while rain tapped softly against the windows. A single candle burned beside her bed. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the flame. Then she pressed a trembling hand against her abdomen and closed her eyes. Earlier that day, a physician had confirmed what she had scarcely dared hope or fear. She was carrying Adrian's child. The knowledge filled her with wonder and sorrow in equal measure. Down the corridor, the Duke remained unaware that the heir he longed for already existed, hidden within the silence he had created. Before sunrise on a cold autumn morning, Vivienne Ashford departed Ashford Manor without ceremony, without farewell, and without breaking the promise forced upon her. A carriage carried her away from London through mist-covered fields and sleeping villages until the towers of the capital vanished behind the horizon. She brought few possessions, accepting neither Ashford wealth nor Ashford protection. Hidden beneath her cloak was the secret growing within her, the child whose existence she refused to reveal to the man who had condemned her unheard. With every mile, grief traveled beside her, but so did a fragile determination to survive. Her destination was Seabrook House, a weathered coastal estate left to her by a grandmother who had believed character mattered more than titles. The house stood atop rugged cliffs overlooking a restless sea. Salt winds rattled old shutters, and waves hurled themselves against black rocks far below. Many would have considered the property lonely. Vivienne found comfort in its honesty. Nothing there pretended to be grander than it was. Unlike the glittering drawing rooms of London society, the coast demanded no performance. It offered only space, silence, and the possibility of beginning again. The first months tested her resolve. Winter approached with merciless speed, and pregnancy made every task more difficult. Yet hardship gradually revealed strength she had never needed inside a duke's household. She learned the names of fishermen, widows, laborers, and struggling families. She listened more than she spoke, communicating through notes, gestures, and attentive eyes. The villagers soon realized that the elegant woman living above the cliffs carried neither arrogance nor self-pity. Though they knew little about her past, they recognized kindness when they encountered it. Respect grew quietly, like a lantern glowing against gathering darkness. As the weeks passed, Vivienne noticed needs that others had accepted as unavoidable. Children lacked teachers. Widows lacked medical care. Families lacked support whenever storms destroyed boats or harvests failed. The pain surrounding her awakened purpose. Using the modest inheritance left by her grandmother, she transformed and used buildings into classrooms. She hired instructors, purchased books, and created opportunities for children who had never imagined receiving an education. Soon afterward, she opened a small clinic where widows and sailors' families could receive treatment without fear of cost. Every project carried traces of her own suffering transformed into compassion. People began calling her the Silent Duchess. The title spread from cottage to cottage until it became known throughout the county. Some used it because she rarely spoke. Others used it because dignity followed her wherever she walked. Children ran toward her when she visited the schoolhouse. Elderly villagers blessed her name. Mothers left baskets of food at her door during difficult weeks. For the first time since her marriage collapsed, Vivienne experienced something resembling belonging. She still carried sorrow, but it no longer defined every hour. Slowly, a wounded heart learned how to beat without constant fear. Then winter arrived in full fury. Snow buried roads. Wind screamed across the cliffs. On the most violent night of the season, labor pains began. Outside, a blizzard swallowed the coastline beneath swirling white darkness. Inside Seabrook House, candles flickered as a local midwife worked through the long hours before dawn. Vivienne endured each contraction with quiet determination. Memories of Adrian surfaced between waves of pain, bringing tears she could not stop. Yet when the cries of a newborn finally filled the room, every other sound seemed to disappear. The world changed in a single heartbeat. The child was a boy. She named him Oliver. Wrapped in blankets and placed gently into her arms, he opened his eyes and stared upward with astonishing calm. Vivienne smiled through tears as she traced his tiny features. In that moment, loss and hope occupied the same space within her. Oliver carried reminders of his father she could not ignore, yet those reminders no longer wounded her. Instead, they felt like promises. Looking at her son, she understood that the future remained unwritten. Whatever mistakes had shattered one chapter of her life, another had just begun. News of Oliver's birth spread quickly across the county. By evening, despite deep snow and dangerous roads, villagers gathered outside Seabrook House carrying lanterns. Golden lights shimmered through the storm like stars descending to earth. Families sang, children laughed, and fishermen raised cheers toward the illuminated windows. Standing beside her son's cradle, Vivienne watched the celebration in astonishment. She had arrived as a stranger burdened by heartbreak. Now an entire community rejoiced for her happiness. The sight warmed parts of her spirit she had believed permanently frozen. For the first time in years, genuine peace settled over her heart. Far away in London, peace remained impossible. Ashford Manor had become a monument to regret. Adrian moved through silent corridors haunted by memories he could not escape. The absence he once demanded now followed him everywhere. During solitary meals, he found himself staring at the empty chair where Vivienne had once sat. Servants spoke carefully around him, sensing wounds that never healed. Then a discovery changed everything. A trusted investigator uncovered irregularities within the letters that had condemned his wife. Signatures appeared forged. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Suspicion began unraveling the entire accusation thread by thread. The truth emerged slowly, yet each revelation struck Adrian with devastating force. Vivienne had never betrayed him. The evidence had been fabricated, the meetings invented, and the scandal engineered by someone determined to destroy their marriage. Guilt settled over him heavier than any punishment. While he wrestled with the enormity of his mistake, life continued along the distant coast where the woman he had wronged built something beautiful from ruins. Then, during the 5th year of her new life, a celebrated explorer and war hero arrived in the county. Lord Nathaniel Sterling noticed the silent Duchess only once before becoming utterly unable to forget her. He saw grace beneath sorrow, strength beneath silence, and a mystery no battlefield had prepared him to confront or understand completely from the very first glance. 5 years transformed more than calendars. They transformed reputations, loyalties, and destinies. The frightened young woman who had once left Ashford Manor before dawn had become one of the most admired figures in England. Across coastal villages and distant counties, stories circulated about the silent Duchess whose schools educated the poor, whose clinics cared for widows, and whose generosity reached people society often ignored. Though she still spoke sparingly, her actions had created a voice far more powerful than words. Wherever her name traveled, respect followed. Vivienne never sought recognition. Her work had always been about healing others, not elevating herself. Yet success carried its own consequences. Newspapers praised her charitable achievements. Influential families supported her projects. Even members of the royal household took notice. Eventually an invitation arrived embossed with gold and sealed with official authority. A grand charity gala would be held in London, attended by aristocrats, ministers, philanthropists, and distinguished guests from across the kingdom. Vivienne was to receive special recognition for her contributions to public welfare. The invitation rested unopened on her desk for hours. London represented memories she had spent years trying to survive. It was the city where she had loved. The city where she had lost everything. Most importantly, it was the city where Adrian still lived. When Oliver discovered the invitation, his excitement proved impossible to resist. At 5 years old, he possessed endless curiosity and an adventurous spirit that brightened every room he entered. He wanted to see the capital. He wanted to meet new people. He wanted to ride in carriages, visit museums, and attend a magnificent ball. Watching his enthusiasm, Vivienne felt her hesitation weaken. She would not allow old wounds to dictate her future. The past had already stolen enough years. Lord Nathaniel Sterling agreed to accompany them. During the years since his arrival on the coast, Nathaniel had become a trusted friend. Famous for exploring remote regions of the world and serving with distinction during military campaigns, he carried himself with confidence that never crossed into arrogance. He admired Vivienne deeply, though always with respect. He never pressured her. Never demanded affection. Never attempted to fill a place in her heart that belonged to someone else. Instead, he offered companionship, loyalty, and unwavering support. Together they traveled to London. The city greeted them with crowded streets, shining carriages, and glittering social anticipation. News of Vivienne's return spread rapidly among the aristocracy. By the evening of the gala, curiosity had reached a fever pitch. People remembered the young Duchess who had vanished after whispers of scandal. They wanted to see what time had made of her. The ballroom occupied one of the most magnificent buildings in the capital. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings like constellations of captured starlight. Hundreds of candles reflected from polished marble floors. Musicians performed elegant melodies while nobles drifted between conversations beneath golden arches and towering columns. Guests filled every corner. Then the doors opened. A hush swept through the room. Vivienne appeared at the top of the grand staircase. For a moment, nobody seemed capable of movement. She wore a silver gown that shimmered beneath the chandeliers like moonlight on water. Her posture radiated quiet confidence. The sadness that once shadowed her expression had been replaced by strength earned through hardship. She did not resemble the broken bride who had disappeared years earlier. She looked like a woman who had survived devastation and emerged stronger because of it. Whispers rippled across the ballroom. Many barely recognized her. Others stared openly. Nathaniel accompanied her with effortless grace, while Oliver walked proudly between them. The child's bright eyes absorbed every detail of the spectacle surrounding him. Guests smiled at his enthusiasm. Few realized they were looking at the grandson and heir of one of England's most powerful families. Throughout the evening, admiration followed Vivienne wherever she went. Influential politicians sought introductions. Philanthropists praised her accomplishments. Noble women discussed her projects with genuine respect. She accepted every compliment with humility, redirecting attention toward the communities she served rather than herself. Nathaniel remained nearby. His admiration was impossible to miss. Yet there was nothing improper in his behavior. If anything, his respect highlighted the dignity with which he viewed her. He treated her not as a symbol, not as a title, but as a remarkable woman whose character inspired him. Later, the evening reached its most important moment. The host stepped forward to announce the presentation of the charity award. Applause filled the ballroom. Vivienne crossed the floor toward the stage while guests rose to their feet. The speech honoring her achievements lasted only minutes, yet every word reflected years of sacrifice and service. When it ended, applause erupted again, louder than before. Nathaniel stepped forward. Then, before the assembled aristocracy of England, he bowed respectfully, took Vivienne's hand, and pressed a gentle kiss upon her gloved knuckles. The gesture was elegant, respectful, perfectly proper. Yet the effect was immediate. Gasps echoed across the room. Whispers exploded through the crowd. Because everyone understood what the gesture truly revealed. Nathaniel Sterling admired the silent Duchess, and he was no longer trying to hide it. At that exact moment, another figure entered the ballroom. Adrian Ashford stopped near the doorway. The applause faded beneath the roaring sound suddenly filling his ears. His gaze locked onto Vivienne. 5 years vanished. The distance vanished. The regret remained. He watched Nathaniel kiss her hand. He watched the admiration in the explorer's eyes. And for the first time, Adrian experienced the pain of seeing another man treasure what he had once taken for granted. Then his attention shifted. A child stood beside Vivienne. Dark hair. Familiar eyes. A familiar smile. The resemblance struck him with terrifying force. Oliver laughed at something a guest said, and the expression crossing his face mirrored Adrian's own childhood portraits. The room seemed to tilt. His pulse thundered. The impossible truth assembled itself piece by piece. 5 years ago, Vivienne had disappeared. 5 years ago, she had left without explanation. 5 years ago, she had already been carrying his child. Adrian stared at the boy, unable to breathe. Everything he had lost suddenly stood before him in living form. A wife. A son. A family. Then Oliver tugged gently on his mother's sleeve and pointed across the ballroom toward the frozen Duke. His innocent voice carried just far enough to silence the thoughts crashing through Adrian's mind. "Mama," he asked softly, looking directly at the stranger who could not stop staring at him, "is that the man from your wedding portrait?" The question hung in the air like the final note of a funeral bell. "Mama, is that the man from your wedding portrait?" Conversation stopped. Nearby guests exchanged startled glances. Even those who could not hear the words sensed that something significant had occurred. Vivienne stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, her hand resting lightly on Oliver's shoulder. Across the ballroom, Adrian Ashford felt every heartbeat strike like a hammer against his ribs. Oliver's innocent gaze remained fixed upon him. The child knew nothing of betrayal, pride, or shattered marriages. He saw only a familiar face that resembled the painted gentleman he had occasionally noticed in an old portrait tucked away inside his mother's study. Vivienne lowered her eyes briefly. 5 years of silence, grief, and endurance seemed to gather within that single moment. Then she looked directly at Adrian. "Yes," she said softly. The word carried farther than any speech. For the first time in years, Adrian heard her voice. For the first time in years, she had willingly spoken within his presence. The sound nearly broke him. Oliver smiled, apparently satisfied with the answer, while the adults surrounding them struggled to conceal their shock. Nathaniel Sterling watched quietly, understanding that a chapter long delayed had finally begun. Adrian approached slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached them, his gaze moved from Vivienne to Oliver and back again. The resemblance between father and son was undeniable. No explanation was necessary. No announcement was required. The truth stood before him. "Oliver," Vivienne said gently, "would you greet the Duke?" The boy extended a small hand with complete confidence. Adrian stared at it for a moment before taking it. A strange warmth rushed through him. This was his son. His son. The realization carried equal measures of joy and agony. 5 years of first words, first steps, illnesses, birthdays, and triumphs had passed without him. He had missed everything. Not because fate had been cruel. Because he had been. The gala ended, but its consequences did not. Within days, Adrian devoted himself to uncovering every detail of the conspiracy that had destroyed his marriage. He revisited evidence, questioned witnesses, and followed trails previously ignored. What emerged was uglier than he had imagined. Lord Malcolm Ashford had orchestrated everything. The forged letters. The fabricated meetings. The manipulated servants. The whispers planted throughout society. Every lie had been carefully designed to exploit Adrian's fears and insecurities. Years earlier, Adrian might have settled the matter privately. Now he refused. The truth had cost too much. Meanwhile, he made no demands upon Vivienne. He did not ask her to return. Did not ask forgiveness. Did not ask for recognition as Oliver's father. Instead, he began doing what he should have done years ago. He listened. He observed. And he acted. When one of Vivienne's schools faced closure because of unexpected financial losses, anonymous funding arrived before the doors could shut. When a harsh winter threatened struggling families along the coast, supplies appeared in nearby villages. When local officials attempted to redirect resources away from her charitable projects, influential voices intervened on her behalf. Vivienne gradually discovered the source. Adrian never admitted responsibility. He simply continued helping. Not because he expected reward. Because it was right. For the first time since their marriage, his actions were no longer guided by pride. Months passed. Slowly, another relationship began forming. Oliver possessed endless curiosity and very little fear. The boy asked questions constantly. Why ships floated? Why stars moved? Why adults complicated simple things? Adrian found himself answering whenever possible. What began as occasional conversations developed into genuine companionship. One afternoon, they spent hours constructing a wooden toy ship together. Oliver worked with fierce concentration. Adrian watched with growing affection. When the finished vessel finally floated across a pond near Seabrook House, the boy's triumphant grin made something ache inside him. Not painfully, hopefully. For the first time, fatherhood felt less like a loss and more like a possibility. Vivienne noticed the change. She saw Oliver's excitement whenever Adrian visited. Saw the patience in Adrian's behavior. Saw a man who no longer resembled the angry husband who had condemned her before servants years ago. The transformation unsettled her. Hatred would have been easier. Indifference simpler. Instead, she found herself remembering moments from before everything collapsed. Small kindnesses. Quiet smiles. The version of Adrian she had once loved. Nathaniel noticed it as well. Though he never spoke of it, he understood what was happening. He had spent years admiring Vivienne. Perhaps even loving her. Yet genuine love demanded honesty. And the truth became increasingly impossible to ignore. Vivienne's heart had never entirely released her husband. One evening, Nathaniel stood alone beside the sea, watching waves strike the cliffs below. When Adrian approached, neither man spoke immediately. Both understood the significance of the conversation waiting between them. "You love her," Adrian finally said. Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Yes." The answer contained neither bitterness nor shame. Adrian lowered his gaze. "I don't deserve her." "No," Nathaniel replied. "You probably don't." The honesty startled a reluctant laugh from Adrian. "But she still loves you." Those words lingered long after the conversation ended. The greatest obstacle was no longer Malcolm, or society, or scandal. It was forgiveness. Trust once shattered could not be rebuilt through grand gestures alone. It required courage from both sides. The final reckoning arrived during a parliamentary inquiry that attracted attention throughout England. Evidence against Malcolm had become overwhelming. Witnesses testified. Documents were examined. Years of deception unraveled publicly. The chamber overflowed with spectators eager to witness the scandal. At the center of it all stood Adrian. For hours he presented proof exposing the conspiracy. Not once did he protect his cousin. Not once did he soften the truth. He openly admitted his own failures, his own blindness, his own responsibility. The confession stunned the assembly more than the evidence itself. Powerful men rarely exposed their weaknesses. A duke almost never did. When proceedings ended, Malcolm's reputation lay in ruins. His ambitions collapsed. His lies finally destroyed. Outside Parliament, crowds gathered beneath grey skies as news spread across London. Vivienne had attended quietly, sitting among observers. As people departed, Adrian emerged from the building. Their eyes met across the crowded street. For a long moment neither moved. Then she stepped forward. Years of silence stood between them. Years of pain. Years of longing. Adrian expected nothing. Perhaps he deserved nothing. But Vivienne stopped before him and looked directly into his eyes. The crowd seemed to disappear. The city seemed to disappear. Only the two of them remained. Then, after 5 years of distance and heartbreak, she spoke a single word. Adrian. His name. Nothing more. Yet it carried forgiveness, sorrow, memory, and possibility all at once. Emotion overwhelmed him so suddenly that he could not answer. For the first time since that terrible night in the library, hope entered his heart. And 1 week later, on the exact anniversary of the day he had said, "Never speak to me again," a handwritten note arrived at Seabrook House requesting one final meeting beside the sea at sunset, where Adrian promised he would ask for nothing except the chance to tell her the truth about the future he had secretly built in her honor. The note arrived on a morning washed in pale sunlight. Vivienne recognized Adrian's handwriting immediately. For several minutes, she simply stared at the folded paper resting upon her desk. 5 years earlier, a few careless words from the same hand had shattered her life. Now another message waited before her, carrying unknown consequences. She opened it slowly. The contents were brief. Adrian asked her to meet him beside the sea at sunset on the anniversary of the day their marriage had broken. He promised not to pressure her, not to plead for forgiveness, and not to ask for anything she was unwilling to give. He wished only to show her something. Nothing more. Nothing less. Throughout the day, uncertainty followed her like a shadow. Part of her feared reopening wounds that had only recently begun to heal. Another part knew the truth. The silence between them had already lasted long enough. As evening approached, she dressed simply and walked toward the coastline where the cliffs overlooked the endless ocean. The sky glowed with shades of gold and amber. Waves rolled toward shore in rhythmic patterns, as though the sea itself were holding its breath. When she reached the appointed place, she stopped. At first she thought she had taken the wrong path. The empty stretch of land beside the sea was gone. In its place stood something extraordinary. A vast garden stretched across the cliffs. Flowering pathways wound through carefully designed landscapes filled with roses, lavender, lilies, and flowering trees. Stone arches framed views of the ocean beyond. Lanterns hung from elegant iron posts, waiting for nightfall. Vivienne stood speechless. The garden seemed almost impossible. Months earlier the land had been barren. Now it looked like a dream brought to life. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned. Adrian stood a short distance away. No attendants accompanied him. No symbols of rank surrounded him. For perhaps the first time since she had known him, he appeared simply as a man. "Welcome," he said quietly. Vivienne looked around once more. "What is this?" His expression softened. "It is yours." She frowned slightly. "I do not understand." "You will." He offered his arm. After a brief hesitation she accepted. Together they began walking through the garden. Every few steps Adrian revealed another detail. The first grove contained dozens of young oak trees. Each tree represented a family reunited through programs funded by Vivienne's charitable work. Further ahead stood rows of flowering roses. Every rosebush honored a widow whose life had been changed through the clinic she established. Another pathway celebrated children who had received education through her schools. Their names had been engraved into stone markers lining the walkway. Vivienne paused repeatedly to read them. Many names were familiar. Faces returned to memory. Children who once struggled to read. Families who had survived impossible circumstances. People who had found hope because someone cared. Tears gradually filled her eyes. "This was your doing?" Adrian said softly. No, she replied. It was theirs. That answer is exactly why this place exists. They continued walking. The farther they traveled, the more emotional the journey became. Every corner of the garden reflected lives touched by kindness. Not power. Not wealth. Kindness. The quality Adrian had once overlooked when it mattered most. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, they approached the center of the garden. A magnificent pavilion stood overlooking the ocean. Its architecture blended elegance with simplicity. Golden light streamed through the open entrance. Adrian stopped before it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he gestured toward the doorway. Go inside. Vivienne entered. The sight waiting there stole her breath. A single portrait hung upon the far wall. Large, beautiful, illuminated by the setting sun. She moved closer. Her hands trembled. The portrait did not depict a duke. It did not depict generations of Ashford ancestors. It did not celebrate titles, estates, or power. It showed Vivienne seated beneath a tree, holding Oliver in her arms. The artist had captured happiness rather than status, love rather than prestige, life rather than legacy. For several moments she could not speak. Adrian remained quietly behind her. Finally she turned. Why? His answer came immediately. Because I spent years believing the Ashford legacy was built by men like me. His voice grew rough. I was wrong. Vivienne listened without interruption. You gave people hope when you had every reason to become bitter. You built schools while I sat inside empty halls regretting my mistakes. You changed lives without asking for recognition. This family's future should not be remembered because of my title. His eyes met hers. It should be remembered because of you. Emotion tightened her throat. No apology could have affected her more deeply. Not because of the garden. Not because of the portrait. Because she finally understood that Adrian truly saw her. Perhaps for the first time. The wind carried the scent of flowers through the pavilion. Below, waves crashed gently against distant rocks. For a long moment neither moved. Then Adrian stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. As though approaching something precious. I cannot undo what I did. His voice remained steady despite visible emotion. I cannot return the years I stole from us. Vivienne felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I know. I accused you when I should have trusted you. Yes. I abandoned you when I should have protected you. The words hung between them. Painful. Necessary. True. Adrian nodded. I know. Silence followed. Not the cold silence that once separated them. A different silence. One filled with honesty. Then, before the woman he still loved, Adrian Ashford lowered himself onto one knee. The gesture shocked her. Not because he was a duke. Because pride had once defined him. Now pride was nowhere to be found. He looked up at her. Not as a nobleman. Not as a ruler of estates. Simply as a man asking for grace. I am not asking for forgiveness. Vivienne stared at him. I am asking for the opportunity to deserve it. The simplicity of the words shattered the final walls around her heart. For years she had imagined this moment. Imagined apologies. Explanations. Declarations. None of them compared to the sincerity before her now. Adrian expected nothing. That was why she finally believed him. A smile touched her lips through tears. Then she extended her hand. The same hand he had failed to protect. The same hand another man had once kissed in admiration. The same hand now offered freely. Adrian looked at it in disbelief. Slowly he rose. Their fingers intertwined. Neither spoke. They did not need to. The answer existed in the space between them. Behind them, another voice suddenly interrupted. Wait. They turned. Oliver came racing along the pathway. Several villagers followed behind him, laughing breathlessly. The boy skidded to a stop before his parents. His face shone with excitement. I almost forgot. From inside his coat he produced a small wooden box. Vivienne blinked in surprise. Oliver? The boy opened the box proudly. Inside rested 2 wedding rings. New rings. Beautifully crafted. I asked the jeweler months ago, he announced. Because I thought you might need them someday. Neither parent managed a response. Emotion overwhelmed them completely. Oliver handed one ring to Adrian and the other to Vivienne. Try again, he said. The innocence of the statement broke the last remnants of sorrow. Vivienne laughed through tears. Adrian laughed with her. And together they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers. As darkness settled across the coast, lanterns throughout the garden suddenly illuminated. Hundreds became thousands. The pathways glowed like rivers of golden light. Villagers emerged from every direction. Teachers, children, widows, families, people whose lives had been changed by the woman standing at the garden's center. Among the crowd stood Nathaniel Sterling. He watched quietly from a distance. For a brief moment, his eyes met Vivienne's. She understood immediately. He smiled. Not sadly. Not regretfully. Simply with genuine happiness. Then he tipped his hat, turned toward the harbor below, and walked away toward a future of his own choosing. Months later, the second wedding took place. Unlike the first ceremony, there was no obsession with status. No concern for appearances. Nobles stood beside fishermen. Servants stood beside aristocrats. Children from Vivienne's schools scattered flower petals along the aisle. Oliver carried the rings with enormous pride. When Adrian and Vivienne exchanged vows beneath the pavilion overlooking the sea, the entire garden erupted in applause. Night fell. Thousands of lanterns rose into the sky. Golden lights drifted upward like stars returning to heaven. Adrian wrapped an arm around Vivienne. Oliver stood between them. Together they watched the lanterns disappear into the darkness above the ocean. Years earlier, 5 cruel words had destroyed a marriage. Now, beneath a sky filled with light, love had accomplished something far greater than forgiveness. It had built a second chance strong enough to become a forever.